Welcome into the 24/7 Sports College Basketball Show in this special episode of Portal Mania, where we talk about all of the madness that is the current transfer portal. Before we get going, if you're watching this on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this, no matter if you're watching it there or on any of our other platforms. All right, now on this week's show, we are going to get into everything portal related because we only have 1 week left before the portal comes to a close, and we have already seen some record-setting numbers. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the best players left available in the portal as we speak today, as of noon Eastern time on Wednesday. Then we're going to go over the programs that have already done some major work here, both good and bad. Who's gotten off to a really good start? Obviously, Michigan was in the news last week. And who still has some work left to do? And there are some blue bloods in that category. Last but not least, we are going to talk about the high school recruiting ranks, as we've seen a number of top prospects reopen their recruitment here in the last few weeks due to the implications of the portal. So make sure you stay tuned for all of that. All right, without further ado, we're going to bring in the 24/7 Sports czar of the transfer portal, as I like to call him, our very own Travis Branham. Trav, thanks for joining us here today.
Of course, man. Always happy to be here.
All right, so I want to talk about a few different guys. Obviously, we saw this be a huge week for Michigan and Dusty May, but one name that we did not see was John L. Davis, who was widely speculated to be following his former head coach and become a Wolverine. But thus far, we have not seen or heard anything. So what is the latest with John L. Davis?
Yeah, this is becoming a two-man race, but quickly trending in the direction of Arkansas pulling away as the ultimate victor. As of today, they are gaining all sorts of momentum heading into the weekend. The other team that had been speculated around them was Kentucky, the team that is trying to fill out a roster as we speak, just like John Calipari. But again, as we're heading into this weekend, all the buzz is surrounding the Arkansas Razorbacks, and ultimately, that's where I'm predicting he will land.
All right, so interestingly enough, you hear that Michigan appears to be, am I understanding you correct, Trav? Michigan is not in the mix for John L. Davis at this point?
That is correct. Michigan is not in the picture. There's been speculation whether it be not being able to get in academically or NIL related. Either way, at this point, not anticipating Dusty May being in the race for his star guard.
All right, interesting there. All right, we're going to keep it in the backcourt. And I want to ask you about Javon Small, because as the guards keep flying off the board, this is a player who stuffed the entire stat sheet last year for Oklahoma State. He really filled it up. He can impact the game in a variety of different ways. What is the latest on his recruitment right now?
He was on an official visit to Ole Miss yesterday. So Chris Beard and the Rebels will be a factor here. But he is not done taking visits yet. He is actually in the midst of setting up 3 more visits as we speak. First and foremost, looking like he will be heading to Kansas for an official visit. And that, to me, is becoming a very intriguing program, and one that I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on in the weeks ahead. Kansas just lost their incoming freshman point guard last night in LeBaron Falan. So they're going to be looking to fill their backcourt. And as we all know, they are trying to get older and fast. The other 2 teams that he is expected to set visits to include Villanova and West Virginia. So this one is not coming down to an imminent decision, although he did, again, just visit Ole Miss yesterday. So, again, one we will be keeping a very close eye on in the days and weeks ahead.
Now, Jayhawk fans, make sure you stay tuned, because we are going to dig into Kansas's class, both high school and transfer portal, as this show goes on. It's important to note, though, they do have DeJuan Harris coming back at the point. Small, of course, can play on and off the ball. Be very interesting to see what happens. And again, we are going to talk about that more later. All right, let's go up front. Now, we have seen a just collection of big men jump into the portal here. It seems like there's a new high-impact starter big put his name in and test this market, so to speak, with each passing day. One of whom who's getting a lot of traction is Jonas Adu, though, the former Tennessee big man. What is the latest on his process?
Yeah, his recruitment here has been pretty fluid, to say the least. Took a visit to Baylor last weekend. I actually had put a crystal ball in for Baylor to land Adu, and I still do think that they are the leaders in the clubhouse. However, UNC is not going to go down without a fight. They are continuing their pursuit of the Tennessee big man. And another team he is headed to take a visit to this weekend is Arkansas. And Arkansas, again, it's been widely talked about just how much spending power that they have down there in Fayetteville. He is going to be one drawing a big price tag. So will he get on campus? And will they ultimately land him? That is one that I'm going to be keeping a close eye on throughout the weekend. We all know what happened yesterday with Arkansas. Jane Quaintance officially announces that he will not be following John Calipari. Also, would go ahead and like to say that Santos Cyril is not expected to follow John Calipari to Arkansas. It's not totally ruled out, but as of right now, it is looking very unlikely. So John Calipari is in need of a big man to go with Big Z, and Jonas Adu, I would imagine they're going to be very aggressive with.
Trev, I want to go off script a little bit here, but you mentioned the bigs who may not be following Calipari. Ugana put his name in the portal as well. He's also declared for the NBA draft. Is there any clarity at this point about like what he may be interested in doing? Because initially it sounded like he was full-fledged towards the NBA. I, as someone who watched him throughout his prep school days at Putnam Science, wasn't sure that was the best thing for him to do in terms of his NBA stock. And then the news came about the portal a few days later. But is he someone that Arkansas might be interested in?
Well, to not beat around the bush, Onyenso Ugana Kingsley, he's been one that we've been anticipating is going to transfer out of Kentucky for months now.
Right.
So with that was before John Calipari was ever even rumored to be taking the Arkansas job. That's not to say he won't follow John Calipari, but given the fact that this was already on the table when John Calipari was his head coach at the University of Kentucky, I'm considering all options on the table for Kingsley.
Yeah, not anticipating that move necessarily. Then want to keep it at Kentucky and ask you about Adu Thiro. Is that how did I mispronounce his name there?
Adu Thiro.
Adu Thiro. I'm the master of mispronunciations. That's what they're. It's a good thing my last name's easy to say. Pittsburgh native. I know Pittsburgh obviously has a spot to fill with Bub Carrington going pro. Obviously, I think he would be appealing to a lot of different programs because he's so versatile on the wing and because he's made such strides after being a late blooming high school kid. But what do we know about his process right now?
Yeah, he has cut his list down to 5, Pittsburgh being one of those, Arkansas being another, and a return to Kentucky being another. However, I do not anticipate him coming back to Kentucky. I do not anticipate him following John Calipari to Arkansas. So that leaves just 3 teams, but the 2 ones I'm looking at the closest here is Pittsburgh, again, hometown, and the North Carolina Tar Heels. We finally got a decision out of Harrison Ingram recently, and it seems that the interest levels are picking up quickly between both parties with Thiro and the Tar Heels. He would be a perfect fit in that Harrison Ingram style role with his size, his defensive versatility, the energy he brings to the floor, and the untapped potential he still has to continue growing and evolving on the offensive end. I would anticipate, again, that the North Carolina Tar Heels will continue to ramp up this interest in the team that I have my eye on the closest.
All right. Now, does that mean that you're expecting Ingram to stay in the draft? Obviously, Harrison Ingram recently declared for the NBA draft. There's been a lot of news out of Chapel Hill. RJ Davis coming back, Harrison Ingram declaring. But of course, just because you're declaring doesn't mean you're staying in the draft. But is it your belief that Ingram is going to be leaning towards keeping his spot in this 2024 NBA draft?
Yeah, as of now, that's kind of the indications that we are all going with here. That wasn't necessarily part of his announcement. He kind of left that open-ended. He didn't say he was going to be signing with an agent and making this official. He will not be coming back to college. But with the way that North Carolina is operating moving forward, it appears to me that they are planning that he will be staying in the draft, and just gauging his kind of draft stock at this moment. The season he had, the versatility he provides on the floor, the shot making that he was able to show this past season. I mean, it would be a bit of a surprise to me to not at least see him get a guarantee of some sorts in that second round.
And this is, of course, a player that flirted with the NBA even back before he arrived at North Carolina when he was at Stanford. So that is good context there as it relates to what's happening in Chapel Hill with North Carolina. Last guy I want to ask you about is Brandon Garrison. This is a former McDonald's All-American who was in the portal really quickly. And even as commitments have continued to fly off the board, even as new big men have joined the market, he is still open in his process. So it's a little surprising that we haven't seen him move quite as fast as some of the other players to go in the portal as early as he did. But where are things at right
He has been one of the more interesting and fluid transfers out there. As soon as he hit the portal, all expectations were that he is going to be sticking close to home. The two teams that were picking up the most buzz in those early days was Oklahoma and Kansas. However, weeks have gone by since he entered the portal. Oklahoma remains involved, but we have been seeing a mix of schools enter the picture, both enter and exit the picture, I should say. And now the three teams that seem to be the most active in this recruitment is Oklahoma again, also Texas, a team that's not too far from home, and the Arkansas Razorbacks. And again, Arkansas is going to be need of filling this front court, so a good option to have as they also chase a do. If one falls through, maybe they get more aggressive and try to land the other.
Coach Cal needs a big. That is a theme of this discussion. Trav, as always, thank you for your knowledge, your expertise, and all of the inside information you bring to the show. Everybody, you can follow Trav online, 247sports.com, for all the latest in the transfer portal. Again, wall-to-wall coverage, recruiting rankings, transfer portal updates. It's all there, 247sports.com. You know who else you can find at 247sports.com? That is our very own Isaac Trotter, who is going to be the next to join us in the show here. He and I are going to break down some of the best teams in terms of who's done the best recruiting the portal so far. And you get a look at it right there. Indiana, Kansas, UCLA, among those that have done the best. Isaac, welcome to the show.
It just is the portal never sleeps, right? What do we have? 1,800 names in the portal right now, almost 500 commits. It never ends. Although I will say, shout out to the NCAA. I haven't said that in a while. Locking down the new rule of having grad transfers have to enter by May 1st. That's a big time deal for us. That should make our March a little bit easier. Should also make, or May, excuse me, a little easier. It should also make some coaches' months a little bit easier. Start planning some vacations a little bit.
Shout out John Rothstein. We sleep in May. He knew something we didn't about this rule. And Trotter, for people who don't know like the full story here, this just came out about 2 hours earlier this morning, Wednesday morning. Can you brief the viewers on exactly what that means and why it's so important?
Yeah, it's just a major shift of what it was in the past. Grad transfers before could enter basically at any time. Last year, we saw Cam Spencer entered at like May 20th, I believe, like 3 weeks after that first May 1st deadline for undergraduate transfers. And that really like shifted the complexion of the sport, right? He lands at UConn. It was a heated recruitment, but he goes there and wins the national championship and really improved his draft stock. He's probably a second-round pick in the June 2024 NBA draft. But he wasn't alone, right? We saw Paul Mulcahy. He entered the transfer portal like June 9th, I believe. So it's just a very different aspect where we saw a lot of tampering going on with a lot of those graduate transfers where, teams are hitting them up in the middle of the summer trying to get them into the portal because they could basically enter at any time. Even right. Antonio Reeves at Kentucky trying to take classes, figuring out if he could graduate and leave at different spots. So it just was mayhem. And I feel like this deadline changes it a little bit. I do wonder if it opens up the door for some of these NBA draft guys who put their name in the draft. Hey, just throw your name in the portal too. It might not be the worst case scenario just to cover your options. So in the next week, don't be surprised if we see some really big names just put their names in the portal, even if they don't necessarily have that intention of coming back to college right now.
And to clarify, just because you put your name in the portal, it does not remove the option that you choose to go back to your original school. So you can, to your point, if you declare for the NBA draft and you're not entirely sure what the NIL market will bear, you put your name in the portal, and then it gives you the option to consider your college options if you don't get that guarantee you want in the NBA draft process. So hopefully we've explained why that is such a big deal. But I want to pivot now to the teams that have done well thus far. Certainly the team that has gotten the most headlines, I think, at this point. Well, I guess it's a toss-up, but the first team we're going to talk about here is Indiana. They got Miles Rice, they got Umar Ballo, and they got Kanan Carlisle. Break this group down for me, and then I got to ask, like, do they shoot it either? Like that's my question, because obviously that has been the Achilles heel of this Indiana program. So break this group down and then tell me if we got any floor spacing with them.
Yeah, no doubt. I think the shooting is definitely the main conversation around Indiana basketball this year. But I think if you look at two other aspects of this roster build, last year they really struggled in ball screens to be effective at all. And so I think if you're Mike Woodson and the Indiana coaching staff, it's like, how do we get better as our ball screen offense? And Miles Rice was one of the top 100 scorers in pick and rolls last year. Kanan Carlisle has a lot of experience in pick and rolls. So you got like a 2-for-1 special with those two. And Umar Ballo is a really, really good low post presence. You know, the other thing, Indiana went big last year and they were horrible on the glass. Like they were not good on the glass, even though they were playing Malik Renew and Kalel Ware at the 4 and the 5. Umar Ballo, one of the best rebounders in the transfer portal. So yes, shooting is a concern, but I think they buffed up their rebounding. I think they buffed up their pick and roll offense, and they're still in the market for some of these shooters too. Illinois transfer Luke Goody is expected to visit Indiana this week. I think that visit starts Thursday and will go Thursday and Friday. He shot over 56% on unguarded catch and shoot threes last year. So he's as good of a stationary spot up 3-point shooter in the portal. I think he'd be a really nice add to kind of check off that box.
You know, a year ago, I was questioning whether Kalel Ware, Malik Reneau, and Mackenzie Mgbako could fit on Indiana's front line. I think some of those questions were answered. If they are retaining those latter two of those players, Ballo has far less floor spacing than Kalel Ware. In fact, he is someone that thrives by getting to point-blank range in the offensive end. So I think those spacing questions are going to be even more prevalent this year, at least in that front court trio. We'll see. Obviously, there can be growth with the guys coming back in terms of their ability to stretch their game. And Carlisle, to me, is really interesting because his shooting has always been the X factor in his game. You know, in high school, he was kind of marketed as a shooter. And when you watched him this year at Stanford, when he was making shots, like he had some explosions early in the season, in particular that game against Arizona. When he's making threes, he's dynamic. And all of a sudden we were saying, wait a minute, is this guy one and done? And then when he's not making threes, it really closes down the rest of his game. So for him to be on an Indiana team with a 3-point line is such a point of emphasis, and certainly one of the main narratives, I think, is a fascinating subplot. All right, the other team that has done a lot of good work in the transfer portal, making 2 major additions, is Kansas. Now, you heard Travis say that they have other names that they are already targeting. They lost a major commitment in the high school ranks this year, but this has obviously been a big portal campaign for Kansas. Where do things stand right now for Bill Self and the Jayhawks?
Yeah, I feel like the complexion of this roster has really changed in a hurry because retaining some of their top guys was a huge point of emphasis entering here. But hitting the portal and adding dynamic wings was a clear thing that Bill Self was trying to do, and he's done that. AJ Storr out of Wisconsin. I mean, he climbed Mount Edie a few times against Purdue, just driving to the rim with reckless abandon, and he will go try to dunk on literally anybody. So a dynamic scorer who I think is going to have to really refine his game a little bit, but there's no doubt that he could potentially be, 15, 16 points a game guy at Kansas. And then some of the other pieces too, just make a ton of sense. Like Zeke Mayo out of South Dakota State, just a big time shot maker for them. He had to take a lot of tough shots at South Dakota State. I think he's going to get a lot more easier looks too. Riley Kugel is still a part of this transfer portal class. We'll see how long that goes just as they continue to chase. And Bill Self isn't done, right? Like they're looking at Rylan Griffin as well out of Alabama, Javon Small, as Travis talked about early in the show. Like there's a point of like last year really didn't go well. And I think Bill Self is coming in with a big, we are coming back for throats here in the Big 12. And the Big 12 is changing. You're at Arizona this mix. And one stat I looked up, Kansas shot just 80 transition threes last year. That was one of the lowest numbers that they've had in program history in the last decade. Rylan Griffin, if they're able to get him out of Alabama, he shot 32 of them himself. Like Kansas is going to be a lot more dynamic on the wing. And I think this roster is shaping up to be really heavily offense tilted, which doesn't really shock me when you see 3 of the best offenses in college basketball all made the Final Four this past season.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something earlier about retention. And when you talk about maybe getting Hunter back, KJ's coming back, you got Harris in the backcourt. From right now, we are presuming that Elmarco Jackson, former McDonald's All-American, is coming back. Like those are impactful players, especially the first 3. And I would expect Jackson to make a big jump last year. It wasn't that Kansas's first 5 or first 8 last year wasn't good enough. It's that they didn't have enough depth behind that, and then they had injuries. So you return that group, and then you hit big in the portal, and then you've got guys like Flory Badunga coming coming out of high school. I mean, that's the split right there, where you got player retention, you got high school prospects, and you got impact transfers. They look to me to be in a stronger position as anyone right now heading into next season. And Bill Self told you plainly, how long have you been thinking about next season? For about the last month. Well, he's executing. All right, I want to ask now about Xavier. Obviously, the Musketeers under Sean Miller did not have the season this year that they did in his return a year ago in the 2022-23 season, but they have really done a nice job of finding value on the margins in this year's transfer portal by finding the best kind of mid-major prospects who could be ready to take that next step to the high major level. What do we think about the totality of the Musketeers class thus far?
Yeah, I mean, Sean Miller, I feel like he has a proof of concept, right? After the past two cycles, going to get Soleil Boom, then he got Quincy Olivari back-to-back classes. So you look at the guys he's brought in, and it's like, oh, like that kind of moves me a little bit. Ryan Conwell out of Indiana State shot over 40% from three-point range last year. Dante Maddox Jr. out of Toledo shot over 40% from three last year on high volume. You add Marcus Foster, you add John Hughley to add some more depth to that front court. It's like these pieces here make a whole lot of sense. And yes, they lost Desmond Claude to the transfer portal, and Quincy Olivari is out of eligibility and it might be a second round pick. We'll see how his market develops with the NBA draft, but this is a rebuild and a retool that I'm really bullish on. Like, I think Xavier has every opportunity to be really, really competitive in the Big East next year, especially when you factor in what they've had some good news. It's not in the portal, but it's a big deal when you get Zach Fremantle back and you get Jerome Hunter back. Like, those aren't necessarily like transfer additions, but they certainly feel like it after they missed all of last year with really scary injuries. So getting those two back, adding all these guards that can really play off the bounce, and it's a nice mix. Like, I think Xavier is going to be a real big factor. And one other thing that's interesting too, Ohio State chose not to hire Sean Miller. Sean Miller's roster is better than Ohio State's roster right now. And I just find that really fascinating.
All right. But that's a interesting subplot there. I like that. All right. Now, the team that has stolen the headlines in the last week, and it began right here in the 24/7 Sports channel, when Justin Pippen announced his commitment to Dusty May in Michigan. And then they followed that up with just a slew of pledges out of the transfer portal, and they may not be done yet. So what is the latest for Dusty May, and what might we be keeping an eye out for here in the next couple of days?
Well, we're certainly on Vlad Golden watch, right? The big man out of FAU, I think he has a chance to be one of the best players in the country next year. Just an elite low post presence. He was terrific in post-ups last year, and then added a real low post threat to their defense as well. But this group is really coming together for Michigan. They had a lot of momentum on the recruiting trail in the portal, and it's all just like building one on top of each other. It's Yale transfer Danny Wolf, who loved the skill there. They add Sam Walters out of Alabama, who can really shoot it. You think of Wolf and Walters together, like that makes sense to me. But it's their backcourt too.
With Golden, that's what I love. Like, you put the force of Golden inside, and then the skill of Walters, who can really space it, the skill of Wolf, who can handle it and pass it, and you got a little bit of everything up front.
No doubt. It's like you're trying to avoid positional overlap, and Michigan has that. Just a lot of different bigs that do something different and can play together. And then you add it to this backcourt, it's like, okay, it's starting to see the pieces. So yes, Janelle Davis is not expected to be a major factor here, but I like what they've done in the backcourt. Trey Donaldson was one of the most improved players in the SEC last year. His counting stats aren't going to look that great because he didn't get to play a ton for Auburn, a team that was very deep, played about 20 minutes a game there, but he was really solid for them. And then Roddy Gale, I think, has a chance to be the jewel of this class. He has all the pictures, like all of the pieces to be a pro down the road, especially a two-way guy. We've seen him have a really good year for Ohio State, even during a season when he didn't make threes. I think he's a better shooter than what he's shown. We've seen his ability to get 2 feet in the paint, make plays from 10 feet in. He was one of the better finishers from the wing position at the rim. So this group really, really checks off a lot of boxes. And don't sleep on Reuben Jones either. I thought that was a really sneaky good add out of North Texas. Terrific defensive player. And we've seen CUSA transfers be really, really good at the high major ranks the last few cycles. I wouldn't be surprised if Reuben Jones helps them a lot next year.
All right. Now, those are the teams that we are calling hot in the portal, but there are some that have been just a little chilly. And maybe we'll rephrase that to say they still have work left to do. Remember, the portal is open for another week, which means players can continue to put their names in for 7 more days, but the recruitment of those players will continue long after that. And there's a couple of very prominent programs that have work to do. And we're going to begin with Kentucky, where Mark Pope has taken over. We said he wasn't going to win the press conference, but I'll tell you what, he made the press conference entertaining, coming off that bus with his national championship teammates and holding that national championship trophy. But now it's all about what he can do to rebuild this roster. So where does he stand? There it is right there. Where does he stand in these efforts as we speak, Isaac?
Well, they just have one transfer so far, but it's a good place to start. Amari Williams out of Drexel. He's one of my favorite big men in this transfer portal class. There's so many great big men, but Amari Williams is really, really up there, just especially with his defense, his playmaking, what he can do off the bounce. He's super skilled. So it felt like in the era of college basketball, where you're kind of looking for those big men who can be hubs, which is so vital for what BYU did offensively last year, especially with Ali Khalifa. I think Mark Pope is going to try to bring that back with Kentucky. And Amari Williams is a great place to start. But now they got to really get after it, because this roster, it's an arms race in college basketball. And some of the top names are really loading up with high-level guys. And Kentucky's a little bit behind the eight ball right now just because of timing. It's a new coach trying to build a roster from scratch, and they have to load up. And I'm fascinated to see how many BYU guys they're able to get. The big name I think a lot of people are watching is Jackson Robinson. Now, he isn't in the transfer portal right now. Now, granted, we talked earlier that May 1st deadline. Jackson Robinson's a little bit different because he has 30 days from the moment that Mark Pope left BYU, which was in April 12th. So he has till May 12th to enter the transfer portal. So we got a couple more weeks here to see what his value is. But if he becomes available, if he decides that the NBA isn't for him, that's a big name to watch, because we talk about like spacing and shooting and great decision makers. Jackson Robinson checks off a ton of boxes. If Mark Pope can get him to Kentucky, that would be a big time ad. But they're in the market for literally everything right now as they try to rebuild this team into one of the best teams in the SEC.
Yeah, no, it's going to be very interesting. And I'm fascinated to see how much of that BYU playbook that was predicated on three-point shooting and spacing and cutting off the ball, he's going to bring with him to Lexington. I think a lot of that was dependent on having a five-man like Ali Khalifa, who you could bring away from the basket and utilize as a passing playmaker, right? It opens up the lane and allows people to cut. And at this point, everybody who's followed Mark Pope knows that, yes, BYU took more threes than they did twos last year. But you know what happens when you do that? You shoot an exceptionally high percentage on twos because the floor is so spaced. Now, I don't expect them to be like quite that slanted at Kentucky, shoot quite that many threes, because, the calculus changes. Your upside's maybe a little higher. You don't have quite the same recruiting constraints. But I'm fascinated to see the extent to which he operates a similar playbook. And I think a lot of that is going to be foretold based on who he can get in the portal. So it's a really interesting kind of subplot for me that could tell us how he's going to look to play next year.
And two-way guys. I think, like we talked last year, right? Kentucky didn't have enough two-way guys. Mark Pope has to hit on a lot of these type of additions that can also play some defense. Like, you have to be able to get some two-way guys. Amari Williams, two-way guys. So, I wonder if that's like the start of the domino effect here of what Mark Pope is trying to build at Kentucky and how it looks a little bit different than what John Calipari had last year.
All right, Trotter, here's where we're going to end this. When you brand yourself as the Brotherhood, it is counterintuitive that everybody but two players leaves the program. Some of them are going pro, some of them have graduated, but a lot of them went to the portal. And they went to the portal when there was seemingly an opportunity. Now, for perspective and in fairness, Duke is bringing back basically their starting backcourt. Not necessarily, but Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster are expected to slide right into that starting point guard spots next year. They both started a fair share of games this year, especially when they were healthy. But that's it. Those are the only players they have coming back on the roster. And of course, they have the top-ranked high school recruiting class in the country, led by Cooper Flagg, who is, of course, expected to come right in and start, whether it's at the 3 or at the 4 or it's some, kind of combo forward type variation. We've seen them make 2 additions via the portal in the last 7 days, but this is a program that now has some work to do. And by my math, they still need to get at least 2 players who are capable of coming in, providing some experience and solidifying, I think, their front line, but also the backup spots in the guard spots. So where are things at for John Shire and Duke right now?
Yeah, I felt like there was a big outcry of like all these transfers, but I kind of think Duke is better today than what they were a week ago. We
Such
talked
a
a lot.
Dookie. Did you go to Duke, Trotter? He's such a
I
Dookie.
did not. I did not. Born and raised in Illinois, so it's just a little bit different. But the thing is that I keep thinking about with this Duke roster construction was just, again, positional overlap.
Yeah.
And when you have, a guy like Mark Mitchell, I felt like his positional overlap, like those strengths that he has, really weren't that different from what Cooper Flagg was bringing to the table. Cooper Flagg does a lot of the things that Mark Mitchell does, just a little bit better, right? You look at TJ Power, he entered the transfer portal. The new addition, Mason Gillis, does a lot of the things that TJ Power does, only he's better and a little bit older in that. Malik Brown out of Syracuse, the lot of strengths that he had as a switch everything defender, could guard wings, could guard point guards, could guard bigs, really good passer. Like, he has a lot of the same strengths that Sean Stewart, who hit the portal, had. So it felt like there was not room for all of these guys. And when Cooper Flagg's coming in, when Kaman Maluak is coming in, I just felt like it made more sense for them to hit the transfer portal with a chance to really earn, one, a big payday, but two, have a clear path to a real role next year for really talented pieces. And now Duke can move forward with, a little bit more roster space, cap room, so to speak, because this team does have holes that need to be plugged. Obviously, Jeremy Roach leaving is a big loss. For me, I'm looking at a guard that can get downhill, because Tyrese Proctor had a very low rim rate last year. Caleb Foster had a very low rim rate last year. We need somebody different in that backcourt. Again, positional overlap, trying to find someone that has a little bit different strengths than what we already have. So a guard that can get downhill, put pressure on the rim, provide those kick out opportunities for those spray out threes from Mason Gillis, who was one of the best shooters in college basketball next year, will be vastly, vastly important, because again, it's Cooper Flagg's 1 year. You're trying to maximize it. And this is like the Nuggets, right? Every move that the Nuggets make is basically around getting the most out of Nikola Jokic and how can we best support him. That's what I feel like with Duke is this offseason. It's like, how can we best maximize this 1 year of Cooper Flagg? And I'm looking at Mason Gillis. That's a really nice ad. Malik Brown, really nice ad. And they got to continue to add to that. But I genuinely think they're better.
So are we anticipating their next moves to be to shore up that perimeter rotation, given, because we didn't talk about Patrick Ngaba. Now, he's had some injuries this year, but with him as part of this class, with Malik Brown, and the other recruits we talked about, including Con Kneppel and Isaiah Evans and Darren Harris, all in the wing, as we look at this roster as it stands today, is it kind of the backup guards that we point to and say, hey, that's what needs to be addressed at this point?
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt. And I think Jeremy Roach leaving too kind of really set the table here for Caleb Foster to have a really good year. I would have been surprised, honestly, if Caleb Foster and Jeremy Roach both returned. I would have expected one to leave just because of the opportunity for a bigger role. So now you hit the portal, and it's a different time because you're kind of offering not a guaranteed starting spot. You're kind of looking in the portal going, hey, do you want to come in and back up the one and back up the two? You're trying to find that combo guard. And again, I think getting shots at the rim is valuable for this guy, for this potential addition. And then also you just have to make shots to spread the floor around Cooper Flagg. So I think the backcourt is obviously the number one objective for John Shire moving forward, but there's really great options out there. And I think that they're going to be able to find one where this roster is going to fit and look a lot different. And you need to have experience too. That Malik Brown does that. Mason Gillis has that too. And we have such a young team. Like, I feel like an experienced veteran guard that is going to be just fine playing 20 minutes a night, 27 minutes a night, maybe 13 minutes a night. Like, that's the priority moving forward.
All right. Interesting stuff. As always, you can find Isaac both on 247sports.com as well as cbssports.com. And for more, there, you know where to find us, 247sports.com. The latest recruiting news, the latest in the portal. Be sure to check it out, 247sports.com. All right. Now, we've talked about the portal, what is available, what isn't, but here are some of the best high school players on the board. Now, what do all of these guys have in common at this point? What they have in common is that they were all previously committed. And because the coaching carousel was running at such a rapid rate, when the coaches they were committed to left those programs, these players all reopened their recruitment. Now, we thought that the only exception to that is Liam McNeely, of course, who was committed to Indiana and opted to reopen the recruitment, even though Mike Woodson was staying. So to help us break down this class and where some of these top high school players may be headed, we're going to bring in Eric Bossi. E-Boss, welcome back to the show, my man.
Hey, what's happening?
All right, so obviously breaking news last night from our own Travis Branham, and that is that Kansas, the portal giveth, the portal taketh away, lost a guy from the high school ranks. We've talked about the Jayhawks consistently here. But LeBaron, what do we know about where he goes next? Because it certainly seems like the sheer depth of the Kansas backcourt may have been a factor there, but where do we think he could go from here?
Yeah, so first of all, a little background. The stuff with LeBaron had been ongoing for the last week to 10 days or so, with him saying, "Oh, I'm a little bit tentative about coming in because I'm worried about playing time," to, "Yeah, I'm back in," to last night just breaking down and him just making a snap decision that he's out. So the two names that come to immediate mind are Alabama, his home state school. At one point, of course, he was committed to his other home state school, Auburn, where he decommitted from about a year ago, roughly this time. And then Ole Miss, who has assistant coach Wes Flanagan that recruited him to Auburn at the time. Those are the two that come up. I think Alabama is the one to really watch. And now what's interesting is wherever LeBaron ends up, he's going to probably be going from a situation where he was going to have to commit to compete with guys who had been there and guys coming in from the portal, to another situation where he's going to have to compete with guys who had been there and who had also been in the portal. So with the options that are out there, I don't know how much he's immediately increasing his odds for playing time, but also he is going to be able to get maybe back closer to home, which is important with some kids. So Alabama, though, would definitely be the one school that I keep a real close eye on.
All right, good to know. It's also worth noting that his high school coach, Bill Armstrong, now being linked to one of the openings on Baylor's staff. So we'll see if they become a factor, although, of course, they do have Jeremy Roach as well as VJ Edgecombe coming in there. So we're not sure if they have the opportunity.
And Rob Wright and
Yeah.
lots of guys back there. They're going to have to run a 6-out offense next year somehow.
All right, good point. Good point. All right. Jaden Quaintance, he's interesting because McDonald's All-American, 5-star prospect and all that, but he is too young to be one and done eligible. And with G League Ignite going away, I think they might have been in a position to entice him here. But given that they're not there, there really is no domestic professional option for him to consider. So you really have an opportunity to recruit a 2-year 5-star prospect, which is really unprecedented in many ways, at least in the last couple of years. So what's the latest on him?
So yeah, obviously yesterday we reported that he's eliminated Arkansas. He was supposed to be having an in-home visit with Kentucky, and Kentucky decided to cancel that. So I think we can presume that Kentucky is out of the mix as well. He's visiting Memphis this weekend officially, beginning on Friday. He was at Louisville last week for an official visit. Now I think there's a couple others to be determined schools in there trying to maybe get in the mix some, but obviously all eyes are on Memphis right now in this visit to see if they can kind of lock him in. You know, he's a guy with all kinds of physical gifts. He's got long arms. He's athletic. He can play inside and out. He's a really toolsy, versatile player who needs a little bit of experience, yes. But, you know, if Penny Hardaway can get this done this weekend, that's a huge feather in his cap and really a great addition to a team who's already doing pretty well in the transfer portal as it is.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, now one player who is following John Calipari to Arkansas is Carter Knox. And there's a couple others that are in contention. Want to ask you about Boogie Flan. Now, he begins his official visit to Arkansas today on Wednesday. He and Billy Richmond, 2 players that were committed to Cal at Kentucky and very obviously considering following him to Arkansas. What do we know about Boogie at this point?
Yeah, with Boogie, he's certainly had others trying to get involved, but I think the fact that he's wasted little time in setting up a visit to Arkansas, and they've clearly prioritized getting him in, and a big sell with him going there was to play for John Calipari, with what John Calipari has done with guards. I think you got to really like Arkansas's positioning on this. I know they lost Orlando Antigua, who was central in his recruitment, but Chuck Martin is also a New York guy and also spent a great deal of time recruiting Boogie. So I feel like Arkansas is in a really good spot here. Maybe we could see Boogie take another visit or two, but I'd be kind of surprised if he really strays too far away from following Calipari to Arkansas.
All right, so Arkansas, the clear leader from Boogie Flan, according to our own Eric Bossi. Liam McNeely, originally committed to Indiana, opted out just a day after it was announced that Mike Woodson would return. So that was certainly raised some eyebrows there. Took an official visit to UConn this past week after the Jordan Brand Classic. What are we expecting from Liam at this point?
Yeah, so Liam just wrapped up his official visit to UConn. I know there's been a lot of buzz that maybe a commitment could be imminent, but I don't think we're going to see an immediate commitment to UConn out of Liam. Now, I think the back-to-back national champions are really, really good shape, but I also feel like we'll see him maybe take at least one more visit before things are all said and done. Kentucky, Michigan, maybe 2 teams that I would really keep an eye on as potential visiting spots. So I'm going to go ahead and place UConn as probably the leader and the team to beat, but I don't think they're all the way quite across that finish line just yet and still may have to withstand maybe one more visit.
I know I wanted to ask you about a couple of young guys because one theme that we've been on the lookout for consistently, based on what's happened in the last two classes, is the wave of reclassifications. And we've already seen a couple, most notably, of course, Cooper Flagg. Josan Sannon is the most recent example following his commitment to Arizona. Braden Burries in California is a player that we have long had our eye on. He's a little older for that 2025 class, and that is usually indicative of a player who could look to get to college earlier than originally slated, especially in this era of NIL. You were recently in California, Ebos, this past weekend, and now it sounds like maybe he's going to stay in 2025. What can you tell us about this situation?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a great shift with Braden Burries until it shifts again, right? Because that's always possible to
Right,
happen. But
right.
one of the biggest reasons, in addition to his age, that people thought he might go to 2024 was just the fact that not many guys are physically ready to make this jump. He's physically ready to make this jump. We're talking about a skilled, physically solid, dominant guy. If you want to compare him to someone in the class of 2024, he's got some Dylan Harper to his game and what he did, and he's coming off a sensational junior year. So he's ready to make that jump. But I had the opportunity to speak with him briefly, albeit, and he
Mhm.
told me that for right now, he's leaning towards staying in 2025. And not only that, doing some additional digging with some sources and some people who are in the know with his recruitment and trying to get involved with him. It may not just be going back to 2025. We may be looking at a situation where he now ultimately decides to wait until next spring, possibly, to make a decision,
Hmm.
because he's sitting here and watching what's going on with the transfer portal.
Yeah.
What you commit to today, if you commit early, is nothing like what you're going to be arriving to for these guys. Now, there's not a lot of guys who have the power or just the positioning to be able to hold off. But as good as Braden Burries is, if he decided to wait until the spring, he's going to have his choice of any school that he wants to go to because he's that good. And I wonder if moving forward, we might not see a few more high end guys decide to do this. I just don't see the upside unless it's like a clear favorite in committing early right now with how wild things have gotten in the transfer portal. Because I, as an elite prospect, would want to know a lot more about who exactly I'm playing with. And you see that we talked about LeBaron Fallon's decommitment earlier. He committed to one expected roster. It's totally different now, and that leads to his decommitment. So for those guys who are top 10, top 15 type players, if this is the way Burries chooses to play it, I think we could maybe see a few more decide to do that as well with holding things off.
I know one player who is already reclassed, but only up from 2026 to 2025, which means he's got at least another year left of high school, is AJ DiBanza, Massachusetts native who went out to prolific prep and is currently starring with the Oakland Soldiers, getting ready for the first session of the EYBL this coming weekend. Ebas, no surprise, Arkansas reached out almost right away. John Calipari extending that offer, but it sounds like DeBonsa not planning any visits until after the summer. Is that right?
Yeah, I think AJ is pretty much on chill right now. He did take official visits to Auburn and USC during the high school season. Obviously, USC has gone through a coaching change with Andy Enfield going to SMU and then them bringing Eric Musselman over from Arkansas. And like you said, John Calipari reached out immediately, and the message to him is sent to AJ was essentially, "Hey, look, man, we're going to make Arkansas the new Kentucky," which makes sense. He made
Mm.
Kentucky into the Kentucky that it was. And obviously Kentucky is going to be Kentucky again with him gone. But, it's a pretty good pitch of basically like, look, I still expect to have one and dones. I still expect to do this. Obviously, UConn is close to home. They're heavily involved. There's a lot of people, pardon me, with AJ. But the plan now is there's a lot of guys who are going to do some spring and summer visits. AJ is not expected to do any of that. I think he's going to wait, survey, see what happens, and then in the fall decide which other schools do I want to visit.
All right, AJ DeBonza, certainly someone that is going to have his pick of shooters in the class of 2025, currently the number one ranked prospect in that class. Ebas, as always, thank you for your insider information and expertise. As always, you can follow Ebas and the rest of the team on 247sports.com for all the latest in the recruiting news, wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings, and transfer portal updates. Be sure to check it out, 247sports.com. And as always, thank you so much for watching this show. Before you leave, make sure you stick around because the football guys are up next and they just released the 2026 national rankings. You're going to hear all about it on the show, so don't go anywhere. But as always, thank you so much for watching. We will be back with you talking hoops again next week.